Ben, thanks for joining us and
Yeah.
willing to be a guest here on Stacking Victories. And so, definitely looking forward
Absolutely.
to your story. I
Yeah.
think it's going to be very helpful to a lot of people. And yeah, so thanks for that. And
Absolutely.
beginning. So
Right.
pick up where you want, and
Yeah.
let's talk about growing up, family, parents, and all that jazz.
I look back on my life growing up. I had one sister, and mom and dad stayed married, still married, and still both alive. Grew up outside of Pittsburgh, on the east side of Pittsburgh, and my dad was somebody who is very compassionate, very kind person. So he was, he called me buddy growing up. So I was his buddy, like from day one. That's what I remember him calling me. It's funny now, I naturally fell into the habit of calling my son Buddy, and he doesn't like to be called Buddy. So I had to find a new nickname for him. So we talked through that and worked through that. But no, so I have a good relationship with my dad. And my mom was also from Pittsburgh area growing up, and she, I think we all grew up in a loving family, Christian family. So from growing up, I remember day one being in church every single Sunday. My dad was involved in church. That was a big part of our lives. And I went to a Christian high school. Started out in a public elementary school, and was really kind of a quiet kid. Ended up, wouldn't know what to look at me now, but I was overweight for a lot of my growing up years, and just picked on a lot. And so I grew up with a pretty quiet personality. Outside of the family circle, I was really still am kind of an introvert in a lot of ways. But then also just had a hard time finding a peer group, had a hard time finding a place to fit in. So there was, again, the family was very loving, was a pretty, like all of us, I think we grow up and we experience normal life. This is normal. There's nothing too exceptional about my life. That was a blessing because, I hear a lot of people's stories, a lot of deep-seated pain and tragedy in their past, in their lives, and by the grace of God was, had what I could call really stable growing up. So
it's interesting. I know a little bit about your story. The one as far as sort of the weight issue, or as a kid.
Yeah.
Was that so? A little bit about growing up for me is clear to the table. They're starving children and fill in the country. My mom would say, and so that we're guilted into cleaning the plate.
Yeah.
And so is that part of it, or is there a medical thing, or just
I think it was mostly being a kid. It was also actually just not having a lot of intentionality behind it. My family grew up meat and potatoes family, so healthy eating wasn't really like, my mom was concerned about that and veggies and all that stuff, but she didn't really shove that down our throats, which I was grateful for. But I just didn't cross my mind as a kid to think about really like the impact of what I was eating. And because I went through a bunch of growth spurts, there wasn't a whole lot of limit put on that. Yeah. There was actually, my parents, I think in a loving way, were just encouraging me to, get the calories I needed and all of that. And also, I wasn't really encouraged. Physical exercise wasn't important to my folks. And I was really bad at sports. So physical exercise was this place of shame and this place of where I didn't measure up. So I kind of stayed away from that. Okay. Stayed away was bad at sports and didn't like that comparison. So I kind of stayed away from that. And I think all those things kind of contributed to me being in a place growing up until I hit some later growth spurts of just being overweight. And that compounded to a lot of issues that were just me being an introvert. Compounded a lot of issues, insecurities growing up, and that impacted me in those years and later on too. Yeah.
So relationship with mom and dad,
Yeah.
it was good, like you said, and sibling wise, what was the setup there?
So one sister, she's 4 years older than me, and we are good friends now. That started when she went off to college. I think we we got to a place of good friendship. I mean, we had always kind of been 4 years apart. We were just far enough that it was. We didn't have the same friend circles a lot of times, and I was kind of the annoying little brother, I think, and she was trying to find her way, and so there was a lot of chance for us to kind of get at each other and really not understand each other. Besides her being a girl, me being a guy, like there was just a whole lot of things there. So I mean, we had an okay relationship growing up. I mean, I remember us getting at each other one time, and my dad will tell the story where we were bickering in the back of the car, and he just turns around and had enough and just said, "You guys, that's the only brother you're going to have. That's the only sister you're going to have. You get along." And we had been bickering the whole car ride. My folks get out of the car and they turn around and we're crying and hugging each other, in the back seat. And this was probably, I don't know, I was probably 6, 7 years old at the time, something like that. So there was so there were good moments. Don't get me wrong. And yet I think overall we just didn't know how to be friends and involved in each other's lives, other than just kind of being with each other and being playmates in the way kids will be. But then after she went off to college, I think there was a way where we reconnected when she would be home from that, and now she still lives in Pittsburgh. I live out here in east side of Pennsylvania, so there's a way where anytime we connect, we really pick up where we left off, and are really there's a lot of depth there that we find in conversation that I think growing up, I'll say too, our home, silence was something that impacted our home a lot. There was just some ways where if there was tension or a disagreement, it kind of got swept under the rug and we just didn't talk about it. You pretended everything was okay and you moved on. And so my sister and I grew up in that kind of a environment. And then, and that wasn't just my folks. I'm not putting that all on them. It was just kind of inherited learned behavior. I think it can be for all of us. My sister and I inherited and learned that too. And then as we kind of grew and came into our own and grew in our relationship with the Lord and each other, I think we were really able to break through a lot of that and come to a place where we have a deeper connection and are a better support for each other. So
nice. Yeah, I definitely understand that.
Yeah.
It's a new day. The slate is wiped clean
yes.
for the family, and we don't address anything that just happened previously.
Yeah.
So. It really affected the ability to have proper conflict resolution. So
yeah.
So so speaking of that, the growing up, being a man, learning how, what it takes to be a man. What was taught, what wasn't taught. What do you wish you would have been taught? All that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I had a great dad, and not perfect, right? So he came into being a father after having lost his dad when he was about 10 years old. I think he was about 10. So he had significant male role models in his life through uncles and other family members and church members, and yet there was a way he was figuring this out. And I think, me growing up an introvert, I didn't always know how to ask what I needed to ask. And there were some ways where I feel like the understanding of what a man is, I don't think my dad modeled that as best he could, and he modeled that well, and yet there were conversations about what does it look like to be a man of God, in the midst of culture and in the midst of everything that's going on in the daily life of a preteen and teenager, right? So we were, like I said, we went to church faithfully, and yet there was a way growing up, it felt like to me there was, our faith was very important to us, Sundays were very important to us, and yet I didn't know what that meant for, Tuesday afternoon at school with friends and temptations and all sorts of things and food and everything else. And then lust, when you get interested in girls, and when that happens, how do you process all of that as a boy just trying to figure this out, especially in a home where it didn't feel comfortable to ask some of those things? I didn't ask. And I think my dad growing up, not having a dad to have those conversations with him at certain times, didn't know when to initiate those conversations. And that contributed to me, I think, having a sense of lostness in figuring out what it meant to live out as a man and have this, and how this worked. So I've heard the comparison made where, especially as a Christian man, growing young man hitting puberty, it's kind of like you are thrown out of the plane as a paratrooper. You got a rifle, you got parachute and all of that. But nobody tells you how to do the forward roll so you can land without breaking your legs. And nobody tells you how to use the rifle or who to point it at. And that it can feel like by the time you wake up to the fact of all these tensions that live, especially in the area of sexuality as a man, you're already a prisoner of war behind enemy lines, and you didn't even know you were in a battle. And I heard that comparison, and I think that was really helpful for me, because I grew up, like I said, in a Christian home. I was trying to be the Christian nice guy all the way through school, with friends, in church life. I was trying to live up to that ideal of the Christian nice guy. And then there were, passing through puberty, and there's temptations to lust and all of that. And how do you live that out? In doing that too, there's also just the culture in the world, right? So my folks were pretty protective over what we watched, and yet they loved James Bond movies. And so, like, I grew up loving the action of James Bond movies, right? Shoot 'em ups and all of that stuff. And when I started watching them, I was young enough, like I would just put my hands over my eyes. And then you start to get curious and go through puberty, and I just, you start to peek through the cracks in your fingers, right? Start to get curious about this. And so, competing with this, I don't know what a man is supposed to be and how he's supposed to act in this daily living, is also this kind of like James Bond action star ladies man mentality that is telling me this looks pretty good, and this type of sexuality and this type of living looks pretty good in ways that he's a real man, right? And it was really hard to figure out what was there that was such a draw, because that was such in competition of the Christian nice guy, right? And so I feel like if there were conversations that I wish I could have had with my younger self, that I hope I'm having with my son right now, it would be, what's in those cultural stories that draws us to that? Because I think also growing up, there was this just kind of taboo thing of well, all of that is bad, right? And sexuality is a bad thing. And I hope I'm having the conversations well to try to guide, that I wish I could have been guided in sexuality as this gift from God. Our position as men is God's unique design, and there's a way he's called us to live that out in strength and purity and all of those things. And how to live that out in battle. And that's why some of these stories are such a draw. Right. And yet Christ calls us to a different type of strength, right? So yeah, I think those are some of the stories that, some of the conversations I wish I would have had. And I think there's been some ways as I've processed my own journey, what that led to, like the James Bond movies and all of that led to this lifelong struggle with lust, and really an addiction to pornography that was from my early teens, from around puberty to, really a strong addiction through my 20s, took that into my marriage in some ways too. And there would be times where I would be walking a healthy walk and be able to push that aside, and then, like the Bible says, dog returns to its vomit. I kept going back to the vomit and could not figure out why. And so there were there were ways where that confusion really impacted my whole life in ways, and yet felt like I was a prisoner of war for a long time, until God led me to greater freedom in that. So
the that aspect that you talk about, sort of being raised by Hollywood, so to say, or the music industry. I mean, that's something I connect with as well.
Yeah.
And when our parents do the best that they can, just like us, there's always something lacking, something that we can do better, something they can do better. And ultimately, those things, those voids, get filled by something, whether it's their kids at school or in this case Hollywood. So, would you identify that kind of those James Bond movies or that particular part of your life is when you first started to either, well, maybe not understand, but connect, I guess, with some sort of those sensual feelings, inside, or was that something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was because I think I started seeing movies like that and encountering stories like that before I'd reached puberty, so I really didn't understand what sensuality was, and then there wasn't any conversation about it. It was just this, okay, something's happening, right? And then as puberty set in, and then as that kind of mixed with this idea of as a Christian man, part of the ideal, right, is to find the woman and get married and care for the woman and protect her. Those aspects, those healthy aspects of walking as a man, as a protector, as a provider, and all of the aspects of that. I mean, it was just kind of in constant conflict, I think. So yeah, I think it was definitely, there's an awareness of sensuality, like you're saying, I think came through that, and then it was just increased by, everything from lingerie ads to, just everything our culture puts before us. MTV was I grew up in the 80s, so like MTV was big, VH1, all of this stuff, and kind of all those images they're putting forward from music videos to everything there was and I would say Christian culture has come a long way too, and by Christian media, I guess I'll say. So music and stories through movies, things like that. So we have at least some better quality places to look to, right, for that. But back then there was, contemporary Christian was just coming on the scene. There really wasn't a whole lot of other quote unquote entertainment or media in that way to look to, except for what the world was holding up. That was the loudest voices, and I think just listening to those voices really. Got drawn in by those voices and didn't stop,
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense. So, yeah, I mean, you're sort of blast from the past too. The first thing that popped in mind was like DC Talk. Right?
Yeah.
That was sort
Jesus
of the connection
Freak
to
and
the younger generation. So, So you've got the feelings happening, understanding, sensuality, sexuality, or trying to figure that aspect of it out. What. And so that's going in constant tension with walking as a Christian man, even if at that point not realizing it. When was an understanding for you of like, okay, I can have a relationship with Jesus, and or is it was God sort of in the distant?
Yeah, I mean, I think so going to church regularly. I mean, everybody around me was a Christian. Growing up, my parents, my extended family, there was one or two extended family members that lived kind of out of town, and they were not Christians, but pretty much everybody else was, and therefore everybody in my friend circles was too growing up, right? Because parents and family really control your friend circles in your younger years, right? So, I prayed a prayer and initiated a relationship with Jesus. When I was 6 years old, I prayed a prayer because I was afraid of hell. And because I had heard, at least what I could understand as a 5-6-year-old, whenever it was, what a relationship with God meant, and what a relationship, and I knew the whole story of Jesus dying on the cross for our sins and all of that. So I prayed a prayer. I believe that's when I entered into actual relationship with him. And yet, it's a long time to get the understanding of what that looks like lived out. So, I think my church growing up was a good foundation for loving the Word of God. And the people there, the men and women there really loved God, I believe, but it was hard to translate for me, I think. I think I saw them love God, but I didn't know how to do it myself. Went to a Christian high school, and again, as friends, we were vocally committed committed Christians. Everybody there called themselves Christians, but again, living out this faith, we were kind of in this bubble a little bit. Even in college, went to a Christian college, and there was just this protected atmosphere. And right now I see that, looking back now, I see that as really God's protection for me, because I think if I had just gone out to a secular university, I don't know that I would have had the strength to stay, not that I walked pure, but but I would have messed myself up a lot further, if that makes sense. And so I think in college really was some of the years where I questioned my faith, really kind of deconstruction is the word now, right? To pull it all back and really say, what do I believe independent from what my family ever believed and taught me, and what would do I believe this because it's true, or do I just believe this because it's what everybody around me has believed in my life? So really deconstructed kind of that knowledge aspect of my faith, but in doing that, started to discover the relational aspect of my faith I think I was missing. As I came back to Christ, in like junior year of college, and really just said, okay, like I'm in. Yeah, like I've looked at the other philosophies or the other belief systems and realized I don't agree with those. I think this is true. There was also a way where I think God awakened a desire in me to really say, okay, then if this is true, so what? What does it mean walking this out on a Tuesday afternoon? And there were really questions that I hadn't even asked, because I had been in this Christian atmosphere all my life and surroundings. So there was really questions I didn't even ask about, okay, what does this look like when everybody around me is making other choices? Because by that point in college, I went to college to major in theater. God used story, right? He, as broken as the James Bond stories are, right? He used story in other ways in my life to draw me to him. Ended up majoring in theater, going into theater, and so graduate from there and spend a lot of time in this culture that is very worldly, with a lot of people who have experienced a lot of church hurt. In kind of that theater and arts world, there's a lot of people who have turned their back on the church, experienced a lot of legitimate hurt, and are very critical of that. And so here I was as a guy who within the last 4 or 5 years said, okay, I'm in, like this is my belief system and this is what I commit my life to. Now I'm coming up with people who are completely turning their back on that. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of my first real exposure to people who just have no respect or regard for this whole belief system and this whole relationship with a God that they've turned their back on, that I've said yes to. And so that's kind of in those years of encountering those two culture dynamics and trying to live out those. That's where I made a lot of my biggest mistakes. I had relationships with girls that didn't live pure. And God protected me from some of the consequences of those mistakes. Mm-hmm. Could have easily been a father out of wedlock. Could have easily been just had a lot of consequences that He protected me from in His grace, and yet I made a lot of poor choices in there. And just saying again, I was looking at, I know this is the life I'm supposed to have. These are the desires that are drawing me, and I don't know how to bring them back together. I don't know how to say no to desires for sexuality and all the fun stuff that drinking and all the things that everybody kind of around me was doing. So yeah, it's been a long journey. Discover kind of in this relationship with Christ, and I think. I read a book one time where the guy said, Christian author, and he said, I look back at my life 3 years ago sometimes, and I wonder if I was even really saved. So as much as I say, when I was 6 years old, I prayed a prayer. I think, if I had died right then, I think I would have gone to heaven. I think I was in a relationship with God. There's still time, as a 46, almost 47-year-old man, it's a few weeks coming up. I can honestly, I understand that. I get that. I look back, and the way God has led me, I look back at the guy I was in my 20s and say, I know he was he was trying to understand who God was and understand a relationship with Jesus, but man, he's so different from the person I am now. And so I really am grateful. God's brought me to a much deeper understanding of what it really means to have an active day-to-day relationship with Jesus Christ that's just not on Sundays, but he's somebody who walks with me, who I can talk with as readily as I'm sitting here talking to you, and that has impact right now for every single present moment. We talk so. So I'm by trade right now. I'm a pastor at a church, and one of the things we talk about with some of the other pastors is there's this phrase that we've talked about recently is what's your guiding hermeneutic. So that's a big word, but hermeneutic is what lens do you look at the Bible through, right? If you read a verses in the Bible, read a story in the Bible, like what's your lens and how you're going to interpret this, how you apply this to your life. And so one person might say God is love. That's their hermeneutic. Like every story in Scripture, every ways they encounter God, they're gonna see that message of God is love, and that's a true message, right? So all these are true things that line up with Scripture. And I think for me, what I just discovered over the last year was, I think if I had to put towards my guiding hermeneutic, it would be that God is pursuing us right now. I think when growing up, I wanted to have a relationship with God. I wanted to have a relationship with Jesus. I read the Bible, but I didn't read the Bible. I didn't pray to him as if he was pursuing me right now. Okay. And when you're aware that somebody has their attention on you right now, it changes everything, right? Your posture's toward them. You're going to lean in. You're going to listen, and to really. I think the way God has kind of captured my heart and attention is through story, through a lot of seasons in my life, reminding me again and again, listen, I'm right here pursuing you, Ben. I'm here coming after you. And so in seasons of temptation, like he's pursuing me. Well, how? And I've experienced that through other people, so part of my journey of bouncing all over here a little bit, but part of my journey of breaking free of an addiction to pornography was the process of me discovering that first of all, I can't do this on my own, right? I need him. Okay, well that's good. I need him, and he's right. So he's reminding me again and again through that he's pursuing me. Okay, so that's good. But how do I actually experience that pursuit? And God, through a series of circumstances, actually was in a season where I was not in active. In over my head addiction, right? So it was one of those seasons where I wasn't regularly run into that pit of pornography all the time, and that pit of lust all the time. And yet it was always in the background, right? There was always the temptation there. In one of those seasons, God, through some other ways, made me aware that I had anger issues with my kids, anger issues at sometimes not directly with my wife in the sense of that I wouldn't scream at my wife or yell at my wife, but I'd get pretty frustrated. And when I get frustrated and angry, a lot of times I get quiet, right? Which is, it's tempting there to say that I'm dealing with my anger in a healthy way. Right. But we know that's a big lie, right? I can be holding a lot of unhealthy anger in there, and resentment and bitterness and all this stuff can be building up inside, even though I'm not exploding on the outside. And so God, through that, revealed to me, through that and at a season where just having 3 kids was overwhelming, revealed to me I was responding in some ways that were unhealthy in all sorts of areas of my life, and you need somebody else. And so I had somebody who my wife knew that just offered to walk with me through the 12 steps, the Christian 12 steps. And so that's where I started really accessing that tool that I believe is spirit-filled and God-led, that he uses those steps as kind of this pathway, this defined pathway, because we know we want freedom in Christ the more we get to know him, and yet I think a lot of us I struggled a lot of my life. Okay, what is okay, what's a tangible thing I can do? How do I participate with God in what he wants to do, right? If he wants to make me look like Christ, I'd love to get there, but I have no idea how to get there. And I think one of the tools he uses is the 12 steps to say, okay, here's a pathway, right? And he's used that in a lot of people's lives. And so someone came along, my brother Chris came along in my life and offered to be a sponsor for me and walked with me through the 12 steps. And that I experienced a lot of freedom as I dove deeper into my own soul and my own struggle, and not just trying to beat this one addiction, pornography, but to understand why I was acting in all these unhealthy ways.
Right.
Because I think one of the problems with addiction in our lives is not just the addiction itself, but I think the enemy can, with the addiction, put blinders on us. So I think if I look back at, saved when I was 6 years old, right? And through 26, maybe later, 20 years, ever since the pornography addiction started as a preteen, 15, 20 years, you ask me how I'm doing spiritually, how you doing with God and everything. The first thing that came to mind, whether I said it or not, was, have I acted out on lust in any way? How am I doing with this addiction, right? And this, I think that's one of the things the enemy uses even in our addiction is, not that that's not something we need to get rid of, but it becomes this all-consuming obstacle to our life with God. So much so that it can become bigger than God in our minds and our hearts. And one of the things as I worked through the 12 steps and God started to do a deeper work in my heart, I realized, okay, it's not actually about this. Yes, God wants me to walk away from this because that's not his plan for my life.
Absolutely.
And yet, I'm running to those things because of insecurities of my own and anger of my own and all these things underneath the surface that I didn't know were there. And that's what he wants to get at, because that's going to help me with all of these other ways I'm acting out and all these other unhealthy habits in my life. So, because I think with addiction comes a lot of shame. And that's why it can become so big in our minds, is whatever our particular bent is, whatever idol we tend to run to, whether it's pornography or alcohol or drugs, it becomes so big and all-consuming for us. And yet God's doing far more than just, he wants to do far more than just fix this one area of our life. He just wants to capture our hearts,
right.
for an eternity with him. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sort of laying the groundwork there of how things went for you, so that towards the end, or when we spend a big chunk on what do those victories look like for you? And, how do they continue to stack to get you to where you are today, knowing that there's still going to be more ahead. So but before we get to that, I want to sort of backtrack so we had school, you got college. I'm assuming college was outside of Pittsburgh. I mean,
I went to college in Harrisburg, Messiah College. It was a Christian college, and I chose that college pretty much because my sister went there, and I'd spent 4 years. She was 4 years older than me, right? So I had spent 4 years going to visit her there. It was a place I was familiar with, and so it was like, okay, I'm going to go there. And it's funny because I was interested in theater, right? And my folks actually worked at Carnegie Mellon University, so I could have gone there for low or no cost, right? And that's a really good school for theater. And praise God, for some reason, didn't even cross my mind. I was like, I'm going to the school that I'm familiar with. This is safe because it's familiar territory, so I'm going here. So, But again, that was God's protection over my life, I think, in a lot of ways. Yeah.
And so you had said before in your I guess your brief description of college. So even though it's Christian college, you go for the right reasons, and even I guess secular college, a lot of people go there for the right reasons.
Sure.
To get education and that next stepping stone. Yep, we all know that party life is a piece of that, and you sort of alluded to that. Yeah. Not just with the interest in other girls, but you talked about some of the drinking and so for those that are listening or watching, they might think, "Oh, Christian college, really? That happens?"
Right. It does.
There's not a huge hedge of protection that eliminates that stuff. So So I mean, was that a large piece of it, or just part of the experience? Or
I'd say it was part of the experience. I mean, the friend circles that I kind of walked with through college. I would say dabbled in partying, but didn't didn't go full throttle. So we didn't have frat parties, things like that. I'm not familiar with that kind of that kind of culture, but it was something that was always kind of in it was this semi-protected atmosphere, and yet we were. It wasn't about. I would say it this way. I think the question on teenagers' minds growing up as a Christian, right, is like with physicality, sexuality, is, how far can I go and it's still okay, right? I didn't cross the line, right? And I think that's what a lot of us in Christian colleges were doing. Like, how far can we go? How much of a taste can we get of the world? So my junior year of college, I spent a semester at Temple University. Messiah had this program where you could, it actually was old frat houses, but they had rehabbed them into housing for Messiah students. You could live across the street from Temple University, downtown Philly, and go to classes at Temple and then still be with friends from your own school there. So went there, and again, that was a place of taste in city life and a place of, I turned 21 that year and things like that. So, I mean, there's all sorts of excuses to just kind of like, okay, how far can we go? Like, let's see what's up with this alcohol thing. Let's ditch church and let's hang out late on a Saturday and go places that are probably not the best for us, So I wouldn't say it was heavy partying, and yet we were just figuring out how close we could get without crossing the line instead of how far away can we stay from it,
Right.
And then I think that really continued that kind of temptation. I think of tasting, how far can I be in the world but not of it, right? Well, forget about the last part. Let's just worry about being in the world, right? I think that continued after graduating. I spent a couple years back in Pittsburgh, trying to do the theater scene there a little bit while working a day job, and then I ended up moving to Baltimore. This was about 2002, moved to Baltimore a couple years after college, and it was for an internship at a theater in downtown Baltimore, and then ended up working there for about 5 years as a scenic carpenter. So my day job and everything was kind of steeped in it, again, this worldly culture, and where I'm faced every day with people living in a completely different value system. And so I think some of that too was some of those first few years there as well were a lot of like tasting that party in life for what it was, post college for everybody there, but a lot of young people working in a environment and acting in a whole lot of unhealthy ways,
Yep.
So clubs and partying and things like that. So
so before we took a break there, we're talking about sort of the college life and coming from that, and I guess being in the world and of the world, that sort of stuff. And it's good to hear that that wasn't you didn't sort of embrace you and keep hold you hostage.
Sure.
Bonded to it, and so. Which then probably was beneficial in leading into, you mentioned your marriage, and kids, and so what did that look like as far as first meeting, your I guess the girl that you thought you were going to marry, or maybe you didn't know right away, what's the story?
Right.
How did that all come together?
So actually met her through church. We were this was after I'd moved to Baltimore and was several years there. Started going to a church called Grace Fellowship in Timonium, and so it was a 20s, 30s group there that we met at. We had kind of known each other for a little bit of time there, but hadn't really connected a whole lot. Again, I was still working at the theater, and this was now, I'd been there about 3 or 4 years, and I think I had at least, again, I guess behavior-wise, returned to more the way God-honoring life in some ways. So I wasn't. I had pursued some girls down that I had worked with in the theater. Had some relationships that were pretty much short-lived. Again, really, like when it came down to it, there was a values conflict. That as much as no matter how tempted I was to walk in the ways of the world and just live according to those values, like God kept drawing me back. And so it was this constant thing of like, man, I like this girl, and yet and we hit it off pretty well. And yet at some point, like, there is just this extreme values conflict where she's operating from a completely different basis than I am trying to live my life from. As imperfectly as I'm doing it, right? As much as I'm messing up. So fast forward to meeting my wife, Rachel. We were both about 28, I guess. Get to know each other through that 20s, 30s group at church, and went to a small group she was hosting at her apartment. Sometimes get to know each other there, and really just started talking together. And it was a really short time frame before I think we both kind of were aware we were interested in each other. She had, I guess where it really went into fast forward was she had invited me and about 9 other friends to go see a movie. And all the other 8 friends canceled. She had free movie tickets through her workplace. All the other 8 friends canceled, and so we ended up going to this movie together, and it was this romantic comedy called Just Friends. So it was this kind of thing of, we're not saying it out loud, but we both know we're interested in each other. So we go watch the movie, have dinner and everything, and I think I asked for a number that night, and then we went out for a first date a few weeks later, and they tell you to keep the first date short, right? Like, find something short. So we went on a hike, and we laughed at, like, we went on a hike. We both had a great time, so we went to dinner together. I think the first date was like 6 or 7 hours. So it was, it was. But I think what I saw that was the dramatic difference was, like, in talking to her, kind of just just right out of the starting gate, there wasn't this values conflict that I had experienced with other girls that were just in a different place in their life. I think it was helpful that we were both kind of in our late 20s to really get serious pretty quick. So we dated for about 10 months before I proposed, and then I think we had an engagement. I think we got engaged in October and got married in the following June. So it was it was pretty quick dating and engagement process. And like, again, I think we had both just come. I think both of us for a long time we would tell you that we had longed to get married our whole lives, and had been looking for someone. And flashback all the way to that teenage guy who was messed up by James Bond stories, right? Was also, there was this Christian man who knew, like, God is calling us to love a woman well, and that this is part of God's plan for a lot of people's lives, and I hope it's part of His plan for my life. And so there was this really, as I reflect on my journey, there was a lot of years that was, and I think a lot of my broken choices came out of that impatience of, God, I want a relationship in my life. I want to be married at some point. I want to have a lifelong partner in this way, and you're not bringing her along. So what does that mean? And so I think that's where a lot of those broken choices came out of, was that impatience of not waiting for God. And yet, so I think our journey was really, again, the dating process was quick, but it was because God had done, I think, shaping work in both her and I, leading up to that point. So that by the time we met and started dating, 28, 29, we kind of like knew what we wanted. I had made lots of mistakes, and I kind of was really ready to stop messing around. And I think one of the things that we did, and I really attribute this to her, is pretty early on in our dating relationship, we scheduled some conversations that were pretty intentional about our lives. In that early dating season, you're so infatuated with each other, you just kind of, you can talk about anything, but then there's a lot of the deeper stuff and the stuff from your past that you don't talk about. And I really credit Rach with being intentional about saying, hey, there's some things I need to share with you from my past, and just inviting me to do the same. So there was some ways where that was pretty freeing for me as a guy who had this history now, especially around sexuality, but other choices that weren't so great in my life, of shame And like, this is a struggle I've kind of lived in the darkness, and I don't know, and you kind of hide from church life, right? And from everybody around you, to actually have her invite some of that in, and then actually take a step of, okay, like, if I'm going to be serious about this relationship, I'm going to be honest about my brokenness too. And you know, so I think we try to hide our brokenness from each other. And I think especially we tend to hide that from people when we're single and we're dating, we tend to hide our brokenness, hide all our faults, and want to project the perfectness of who we are onto that person. And I can be everything for you. And I think there was at least some baby steps for us in the dating process that were pretty instrumental in saying, you know what, this person is safe enough to actually let my guard down and actually share some of the deeper stuff that I haven't been able to share with a lot of other people. You know, and of course, within reason, right? So I don't go into deep detail about, my struggle, but I admit that it's there, and I admit some of the broken choices that I made about that, so that there's not things in life that come and surprise us later on.
So, it's interesting. So in the, with shame, shame wants to tell us, be quiet, isolate, don't tell anybody, don't be vulnerable. The person's, going to run away screaming, all that sort of stuff. So was there a big struggle against that shame voice to, open up, in these sort of scheduled, in intimate conversations, or you were able to let your guard down pretty easily?
I mean, I think, I would say shame has probably been a huge struggle in my whole life. There's been ways where, I referred to growing up in a home that was, we swept things under the rug, right? You put the best foot forward and kind of put on a good face and a smile, even if you're not okay with somebody. You're acting, right, in some ways. And then God spoke to me through stories, so much that I got involved in theater, and that was kind of a way that really he drew me out as a person and helped me grow as a person, was using the story in that way in my life. But that's acting, right? And that's putting a performance on. Right. And so there were a lot of ways where I had grown up also in this Christian culture of, okay, this is what the Christian life looks like, and the Christian nice guy. And who's the Christian nice guy? None of us are Christian nice guys, right? That's just this projection that we put on. And so shame was a big struggle for me my whole life, just because I've struggled with performance-based identity, and like my worth is found in what I do and how well I do it, so that it's not okay to cross any of these lines, and it's not okay to admit brokenness in your past. So, and then brokenness in your present too, right? Which we're not going to find healing until we do that, and yet that's the thing we run from. And so. As I reflect on it, those conversations with Rachel as we were dating, they were hard to enter into for me. I think what helped was that she was willing to do that. And years later with Chris walking as my sponsor, he was able to, he was vulnerable with me, even as I was being vulnerable with him. And I was like, okay, this is safe to actually voice some of this. This is actually safe to say I'm not okay, and I haven't done okay, and I've messed up pretty bad, and to bring those things into the light. So I think the biggest thing was for me in breaking some of those shame cycles were having people like Rach in my life who were able to initiate first at those times where I didn't feel safe enough. They were able to initiate first and just share some of their own journey to say, like, hey, this is a safe place to. We talk about this in our home, even parenting our kids. Like, this is a safe place to screw up. Right. And so I think I lived for a lot of my life not thinking it was safe to screw up, and that's why shame plagues us, right? Because we think that our worth is found in being perfect, and we can't be. And so that's been that was kind of the start of some of that breakthrough, for me. Yeah,
makes sense. So I'm going to fast forward, and you get married and you start doing your life together, and then something happens, either around the porn addiction. Yeah. Are you found out? Do you volunteer the information to Rachel?
Yeah.
How does that get to that point where she says, "Hey, you should go talk to this guy, Chris"?
Yeah, so we were a few years into our marriage, and I brought that pornography addiction into the marriage. It was probably we were probably about 2 years in when this was something. I was in a season of acting out and hiding this from everybody, right, and not being honest about that. And there was a time I was home alone and looking at pornography on the computer, and we kind of live in a small town, and the door opened, the back door opened to our house, and somebody walked in, and it was very quick that shut everything down, stepped up from the computer, said, "Wait, hang on a second," right? But it was that moment of nearly being caught. I didn't know if the person had seen anything. I didn't know what they were. That person wasn't in a position that they were going to say anything directly to me, and yet I'm like, I don't know if they're going to say anything. They might. I don't know if they saw anything. They might. And what God used that moment of, I think over the course of that moment happened, and there were about 4 or 5 hours till Rach got home from work and from where she was. And so God, in that time, it was long. It was long.
40 or 50 hours.
Yeah. Yes, it definitely did. So there's all the self-justifying. There's all the, well, I don't think it was that bad, and all this stuff, to really felt like the Spirit of God shut me up and silenced me. And really, I came face to face with, do you recognize how bad this is? I didn't know if that person saw anything or not. I didn't know if I was going to get found out or not. But either way, this could ruin not just you, but a whole lot of people in your life.
Sure.
And so through the course of that afternoon, worked through a lot of that. I ended up, so I knew very quickly that if I am found out, I need to be the one to tell Rachel. And so, and before I did that, right, our minds play tricks on us. I at least want to be making an effort, right? What can I do? I can call a friend. So I called a friend of mine, just said, "Hey, listen, I'm struggling in this area. This happened." And they were very gracious with me and offered accountability. And then when Rach got home that night, waited till there was the right moment to sit her down and said, I got to tell you something, and confess to her, confess that I was still struggling with this. I said, I know this, when we were dating, I said this was in my past. It's not my past. Okay. It keeps being a temptation. And she was clearly hurt, right? Clearly disappointed. And yet the first thing she said to me was, I know this isn't who you are. And that was like, I mean, that speaks right to those lies against our identity, right? This performance-based identity, like, okay, what you did is not who you are. And so that was a moment I won't forget. And so I from that moment, I let her know, hey, I have accountability with this friend. And so worked with that friend a little bit. We had conversation ongoing, but and then it was probably about 6 or 8 months later, in some ways where I was just letting other things impact my life. My relationship with Ray, she could see stress was getting to me. Just that I would just struggle. I had an anger issue for a lot of my life, and well, again, I could keep some of that contained. It was still just affecting my moods, my being present with people in a whole lot of unhealthy ways. And so she finally recommended that I reach out to. She said she says there's reasons that you're given into pornography, right? Mm-hmm. There's reasons that you're chasing that are beyond just the lust desire, right? And I didn't understand that at the time. I didn't really know what was under that surface. And so she recommended that, and that's what started that journey. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because the anger and the lust issue, I can see them sort of playing off each other. So a lot of times we look to try to find, well, what's the root cause? And okay, well, maybe I was looking at porn because I was angry, or maybe I'm angry because I was looking at porn, and at least I know how it played in my life. They worked together.
Yes.
They were in tandem. And so it's one of those things where can sort of look at the totality of things and say, okay, well, I need to be a better man. I need to live as God has created me to live, and this is not what I've been doing. And so that whole process, or whole case processing, as in the work life, it just doesn't work because it's too much.
Right.
If God reveals all of our sin to us all at one time, it's going to kill us.
Yes.
So
it is.
What was the process? Was it to attack the lust issue first, and then work on the anger, or vice versa? How was that?
I think it was definitely the real-time accountability was the lust. As far as that was the temptation that was like constantly there, right? And so the accountability for that was something that was keeping me reaching out on a daily basis to my sponsor, to other guys in my circle that was like, hey, I'm being tempted and there's this. But really the process of working through, first of all, the steps was, and the kind of questions we did the Christian 12-step workbook, right? So that's a lot of kind of penetrating questions as you go through, okay, you're admitting you're powerless isn't just admitting you're powerless. It's like, okay, how have you experienced that in your life? And ask some deep questions. And that's where we really started to get to, okay, well, I've got anger issues. Okay, I get irritated. Okay, I have judgment. I have, all these other things that are kind of these mental issues, but they're almost they're not as taboo, I guess you could say. They're harder for us to see. They're not as black and white as something like lust.
Right.
And then get all the way to food issues and things like that are almost socially acceptable indulgences, right? And where am I running to with my pain? And so that journey of walking through those questions and really, Chris sharing some of his story, me sharing my story, and really getting me to think critically about a lot of my past. And recognize, okay, there's some brokenness that's been there a lot longer than I thought, right? There's some other ways that. Talk about anger. I thought I was a pretty calm guy because people said I was a pretty calm guy, and on the surface I was a pretty calm guy. And then all of a sudden you start talking about anger, and I start flashing back and realizing, oh, I remember when I was 21, and in this case of road rage, where I was screaming, going like 100 miles an hour next to the guy next to me because we were in this road rage incident. And you start to look back at your life and say, oh, this is far more of a problem than I thought, right? We tend to minimize all those things until we're staring them in the face. And right when God kind of peels back that layer, then we start to realize it. So, that was some of the journey, was really taking that slow process. And then also recognizing, I think through that I began to be aware of really healthy and unhealthy reactions and what that meant in my daily life, right? So, like I said, I didn't know what a relationship with Jesus on a Tuesday, but like, what difference did that make? All of a sudden, I'm starting to recognize, okay, I've had this situation at work that makes, and I'm really angry about it, and why? And start, like, even that question to stop and say, why am I feeling that way? I think like a lot of us guys, we bottle up emotion. There's only certain emotions that are culturally acceptable for us guys, and everything else is, perceived weakness or something like that. So I didn't really have...
Toxic.
Or toxic, yeah. Yeah. So I didn't really have like a lot of... spend a lot of time thinking about what I was feeling, but a lot of these questions was actually making me stop and say, okay, I'm doing this because I'm feeling this way. Why am I feeling that way? And starting to uncover more. And really, so through that, I really started to experience some long-term freedom from pornography addiction, and then some freedom from some deeper issues in my own life, and starting to recognize, okay, like there was just habits big and small that I acted out in anger. I had this habit when my kids were young. I would just get so angry with them. Praise God, never raised a hand to them, but I would do this thing where I would just, when I was angry, I'd clap really loud.
Okay.
And it was just my way of, okay, I'm getting that physical anger out. You know, some guys punch a wall, I just clap my hands really loud. And it was this physical thing. What my kids didn't admit to me right away was it scared them,
I'm sure.
you know? And they were experiencing this again and again from me. And when Rach brought this to my attention, my kids, through some ways, were old enough to bring this to my attention and say, like, Dad, we really hate that when you do that. I'm like, oh, wait a second. I started to think about what impact is this having on them? And that, so I think there was this gradual kind of unveiling when I started to get brave enough to ask the questions, right? Because it's a safe space. Right. Brave enough to admit, okay, I'm feeling this, even though that's a quote unquote bad feeling, right? There's not bad feelings, right? It's just what you do with them. But there's these feelings that are taboo. But start to be able to admit I'm feeling this way, and then say, where's that coming from? And say, and then to say I want to get better. You know, so that was a season of victory in my life. And I guess you know, you talk about stacking victories. So I can fast forward that to.
Well, before we do that, in our conversation, you know, before the other day, you'd mentioned there was something about a big impact in your life through attending a friend's wedding and something that happened from that. So I don't want to miss that, because I think that was paramount to, you know, where you get into today.
Yeah. So I mean, that was another. So let's see where we. Yeah, so this was before I met my wife, right? So reversing back to, you know, I was probably 25 maybe, hadn't met my wife yet. This is actually really in that season where, that's good perspective. This was in that season where I was working at the theater, really kind of like just living with everybody there and kind of living this worldly lifestyle, and not really sure how that lined up with my faith and how to walk that out. So in that season, I was invited by a friend to be in his wedding, and it was a friend of mine from college, and went to that wedding, and it was at a Christian campground. He had met a girl through, I think, working at the camp, but through the process of the rehearsal dinner, being there with him, talking to him about the girl, you know, this was like a reconnection. We hadn't stayed in touch a whole lot over the last few years since college, but so we got a lot of time to catch up right over that weekend and really hear what he said about, like, I got this perspective on his relationship and the way he had gone through, like you talk about that dating process and what that, going through that in a healthy way, right? He was going about this in a godly way. He was pursuing a woman and living this life that was everything I wanted to be and everything I was telling myself that I still was, the Christian nice guy, right? Except I wasn't, because I wasn't living that. And yet I look at his life, you know, and as much as I could see at the moment, he was really following the Lord in how he was doing this. They were just honored the Lord in their service and everything. So come away from that wedding, I'm driving home, and it's just weighing on me, just glimpses of their relationship, that being the ideal, and me running the other direction from that. I'm nowhere close to pursuing that, right? And what a God-honoring relationship in life looks like. And so this is weighing on me on the drive home, and I'm just like, I need to escape these. These are feelings I want to escape, right? Right. Don't want to admit to them, right? So what can I run to? There's this cassette tape. Some guy that I knew had given me like a year before of a message. I'm like, okay, I'll listen to a message, because that'll make me feel like I'm a good Christian guy again, right? I'm listening to a message, and I start getting annoyed as I listen to this message, because the speaker starts talking, and he's not going into his message. He is preaching at a college crowd on a college campus, and he says, I've got a message to share, but I'm not going to go into that yet. I feel like the Lord is telling me some other things. And he goes into basically what amounts to this 15-minute altar call to these students, saying to them they're not living the lives that God has called them to live. Saying that they are saying yes with their lips to the Lord, but their hearts are far from him and their actions are far from him, and calling them back to him. And I kept I kept reaching forward to hit the fast forward button, like, get to the message already, pal. Like, I don't want to feel this stuff, right? And he, those moments in a service could come across as very condemning, depending on how somebody delivers them. This man communicated the grace and compassion of God. He came to a point where he said, I feel like you all need to hear this. God gave me children so I would understand how he feels about me.
Right.
And he said, there is nothing my sons could do that would ever make me stop loving them. And he just spoke this message of the grace and love of God pursuing us right in our mess. And at that moment, I was like, okay, I just had to pull the car off the road and broke down. And it was, so again, this was years before admitting to my wife. This was years before God put somebody in my life to walk with me through 12 steps. And yet God was using this moment to crack open my heart and start to admit, like, hey, you need to tell me about, like, you're a screw up, and I know it. That's why I came, right? And for me to actually, like, not believe the message of the lies of shame, but actually be able to say, like he wants me to come to him with this. He's big enough to handle this. He already knows anyway, right? So that was a start to be a crack in that that posture I had put before people, and the face I had put before people, the acting, right? That he started to break through and say, no, I want to get to a deeper level, and I've got more for you in this. So yeah.
No, and I think it's a very important perspective to put on it, because in addiction or mental health, or if any of us have ever attempted suicide, there's again, going back to that shaming voice that wants to keep beating us down and that sort of thing, and we feel that if we hear something from God, but we don't take that step forward and trying to better ourselves, that then we're condemned, we're lost. God's never going to want to do anything with us again, and yet I think probably all of our stories, to a certain degree, there is going to be that initial, tapping, from God on our shoulder to say, "Hey, I'm here.
Yes.
If you need help, just talk to me." And then, like me, and as you have already described, we continue to on doing whatever we're doing.
Yeah.
And but he doesn't stop pursuing us, and he keeps coming around until it matches up with his will for us.
Yeah.
And we start to seek recovery and seek health, and
that's it.
And start to find some of those victories. And so I can see, that's why I wanted to make sure that part was in there. It does lead to then the conversations, with your wife, soon to be wife at that point. Yeah. And then, with sponsorship and work in the 12 steps. And so,
we wanted to be, we want God to flip a switch in us.
Yeah.
And like, just do that. We know you can, Jesus. And I've heard about him doing that in people's lives, where like they turn from alcohol addiction, and all of a sudden God flips a switch and they never take a drink again, never feel tempted to. And I'm like, God, why doesn't it work that way for me? Right? It doesn't work that way most of the time. Sure, he can do the miracle, and yet he works through the journey. And so, I screwed up a lot more after that, and had all those feelings of, again, shame rising up, and like, okay, maybe that moment wasn't real. No, that moment was real. That was God pursuing me. Absolutely. And me responding. And yet it was a moment in a much longer journey. God had far more to do than I thought he did, So yeah.
So then we'll come back to, so you're working steps, you're digging in, you're finding more about, the anger piece, and, the connection to the food piece, and just all the other stuff that's going into there. What does life look like as far as, starting to realize the victories, and as you're taking the steps and completing the steps, and how is it, how is God showing up in your life in those ways to continue to spur you on in this journey of recovery and reconnection to him?
I think some of those victories started with the I think, like any of us, when we have that kind of presenting addiction, or the idol that we're running to at the time, some of those victories started stacking up in, okay, I'm actually experiencing, these are things I'm not doing anymore, right? I used to be tempted to do this. I used to just automatically flip to these videos or whatever. And starting to experience the strength that comes from community and ultimately the Lord, but the strength that comes from community to say, okay, if I watch that, I got to tell this guy. So there was victories that started to come from just recognizing, okay, I don't need to run there anymore. And then victories in really starting to experience a distaste for those things, right? So, as God captures our hearts, I used to never, like when I was a teenager and in college, I hardly ever listened to Christian music, right? It was all secular music, and we can debate about the taste of that music or quality of that music, but fast forward and even movies. I was like, as a theater guy, I love story. I want to see practically any movie out there that came out. And fast forward a decade and a half in my story, and God is removing those desires. So all of a sudden, there's things that are distasteful to me, movies, music, all of that stuff that are just, I'm all of a sudden stopping. I don't ask the question anymore, how close can I get to the line, right? Okay. Yeah. I'm starting to say, like, I don't know, why would I even want to go there? Like, I know where that pathway leads. And so the victories of being able to turn my back on some things that I wasn't able to turn my back on before, and just the temptations, right? Because even as we're with things like lust, even if we aren't going to run there and act out, it's still nice to be tempted, right? We kind of trick ourselves. Well, that's part of being a man, No, like, why would I even run there? I'm going to flip the channel as soon as I see that. I'm not going to entertain that thought in my head. And so starting to see some victories in there. And then starting to recognize some greater freedom in keeping short accounts, I think, was something else where I started to see greater victory.
Maybe explain a little bit. I know what you mean by it. But
yeah.
For the audience about short accounts.
Yeah, sure. So, we call it an accounting where you have caused hurt to somebody else, pain to somebody else, and you need to go back and clean that up, right? Whether that's an apology, whether that's just living amends, is when you, for whatever reason, because of the situation, maybe you've been holding a resentment against somebody, instead of going up to you and saying, hey, I've been resenting you, like, actually just, which that might hurt our relationship, right? Sure. Living amends would just be walking out in a new way with a new attitude of heart towards you. So I think as far as keeping short accounts, it was recognizing when I did something wrong, when I did something that was unloving, when I clapped my hands loud because I got angry at my kids. It was 20 minutes later going to them, not the next day, not a week later, not 6 months from now saying, I'm sorry for all the ways I screwed up in the last 6 months, but going to them that night and saying, listen, I just recognized I shouldn't have done this. That's not the dad I want to be. And so keeping short accounts meant like recognizing when I was hurting somebody else, when I was acting out in anger and some of these other ways that are unhealthy, and going and making it right, and going and changing. Again, it was safe to screw up, right? That's that's what it has to be before we do that, right? I have to be willing to say, I don't have to walk this perfectly. And so, like, victory against shame was just kind of this daily process of not having to walk hiding everything, right? But actually starting to walk and realize, oh, okay, I can actually start to admit what's really going on behind the curtains here, and it's going to be okay, and if I screwed up, but I can make it right. So it's not to say it was easy all the time. But it was another level, right, of getting down there, and there were more levels to go. But yeah, some of those victories were ones that were helpful. And then I think also just sharing my story with others. I mentioned I'm a pastor, and so teaching came out of like kind of the gift of story that God has worked in my life. Is I want to be part of telling stories to people. I love being part of telling a good story. That's why I got into theater. Mm-hmm. And that's God kind of used that in just teaching other people. And so I think another victory was being in a place and in an atmosphere where other teachers, other pastors were just readily, I think of Pastor Jeff, like readily just admitting their own faults, their own brokenness, their own past, and bringing that into the light. And so victory for me was also standing in front of a group of people I'm teaching to, and being okay with actually sharing some of that story.
Sure.
Standing up there and saying, I'm a lust addict, and this is what I was trapped in before, and this is how God rescued me from that. And so yeah, I think that victory of just that vulnerability was a huge step for me too in the journey.
So for anybody out there that maybe has some church hurt, or maybe had a moment of vulnerability within the church and it didn't quite go, in a positive direction.
Yeah.
In your own experience of doing that, from up front and sharing some of your story, all positive feedback. Any detractors that whatever that. Or I can't be at this church if that's who's teaching the word up there.
Praise God, I didn't experience a lot of that.
Okay.
I think I'm familiar with what you're saying only because of my other, experience from other churches where you had to keep those veneers up and keep those protections up. So I remember being at a different church, a lot of incredible people there. It was a smaller church, good community there in some ways, and yet I recall one of my friends was newly married and was going through the same thing I was going to later admit to, right? Was going through a pornography addiction. He had taken that into his marriage, right? So right where, same flash forward, that's where I was going to be in, 6-8 years, something like that. And he gets together with the church leadership, and the church leadership says, well, we're going to pray for you. And that was it. Like the next step, and think about how, I was friends not just with him, but with his wife, right? She was a good friend of mine. And I talked with her later, and the pain she experienced from that, from having church leadership gather around this man who was struggling and offer to pray, but put no other traction, no other steps in place to address the pain in the marriage, to address the addiction there, to guide towards healing. So I think you're right. Like there is just this in a lot of churches, there's this hesitation to get honest about that, and people get scared when they see somebody be honest and like, is that okay? Like, can we really talk about that? And that's really what's going on. So why wouldn't we talk about that? So, I mean, praise God. Like when I think I was in this church culture by the grace of God that didn't have. I'm sure there were those people, but maybe they didn't come right up to me and vocalize it.
Okay.
I think it was. It was one of those churches where I think there was enough people going there that people could just drift off and just not come back. So, I think there were times where. I'd be in conversation and that vulnerability did scare people, but I think more often than not, I saw it open doors where, years later, from sharing my story the first time, or even given hints of that the first time, have guys coming up to me and saying, hey, I remember some of your story. I got to share this. And them actually, so exactly what my wife did with me, right? When we were dating, she was vulnerable and then I felt safe to be vulnerable. It created the same atmosphere. So I think, I've definitely experienced the churches where it's closely held secret and we don't go there, but I think when that story, when that lie is broken from the front, that's when I think there's really power for everybody else to just kind of say, oh, we're allowed to do that. We're allowed to go there, and they start to get a taste of that freedom. And again, it's like we said, it's not flipping a switch for any of us, but it's it's a step in it. I think all of our journeys to get more honest. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and it sounds like that, at least in some of the folks that came up to you, sometime after that, months, years, whatever, that may have been that, that tap on the shoulder from God.
Yes.
That we spoke about earlier with you.
Yeah.
So that's good. So then, as you're stacking victories and you're getting stronger, you're building continuing to build a relationship with Christ. Marriage and family is blossoming and growing, and it's all going in the positive direction.
Sure.
There's ups and downs, obviously, with all of it.
Yeah.
There were some ups and downs, with the church, and there was something significant that I think God was preparing you for in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Maybe around the anger piece. It sounds like that may have played a strong positive way in dealing with something that happened in church.
Yeah. So this was about 2-3 years ago now, and it started going through a season in our church where there was just there were some leadership changes that were happening. There were some unknowns about that were, I think, confusing for all of us, me and all of us in leadership included. And some of those things contributed to just making people feel like they were on shaky ground, making me feel like I was on shaky ground, right? All of a sudden, everything that was certain, we weren't sure what was going on. There ended up being some conflict that happened in the church which eventually led to some division. And it was some long months of meeting with some folks that were in disagreement with leadership, that were just not open to hearing another perspective. And then this kind of led to some fray in relationships where people are leaving the church, and people who not just I've been in a relationship with for a long time, but then my family has been in a relationship with a long time. So it's my wife's friends, it's my kids' friends, it's families like that are leaving the church. And that really, it shook me pretty hard, everything that was going on. It did feed into the anger piece, and I would say even more so, I think what God was, to not say that God created the situation, but how God used the situation, right?
Sure.
What it did in my life was really open up some areas that were of performance identity for me, and of finding my worth in my appearance to other people, and my success in the eyes of other people, and my competence in the eyes of other people. All of a sudden, you got people shouting accusations towards leadership, and I'm part of leadership, right? And it starts to hit at all those deep-rooted insecurities. What I didn't know at the time, but God started to reveal on the journey, is these are insecurities that have been there the whole time, throughout all my life. From back in the days of growing up in a home where we, it wasn't always comfortable to talk about things. Well, it was like, okay, got to hide, got to put on the best face. You better show up to the table. And stick to the script. And if you don't do that well, there's these questions. It hits at insecurities and self-worth. And so here I was in this season where there's a lot of division happening and a lot of accusations coming my way, and it really hit up. Basically brought all of that to the surface. Add to that in leadership, we were not sure how the church leadership structure was going to look like. One of the questions posed to me was would I step in to a greater role in leadership? And my personality, my giftings, I've never been the entrepreneur guy who's been like at the head of the charge, right? The head of thing. Never had a desire to start a company, never did, I've never desired to be the chief guy who runs things. And here was these questions being asked and people looking at me saying, well, are you going to step into greater leadership? And when I looked back at my journey so far, it was like, well, this is looking at this from a worldly sense.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, well, who wouldn't step into greater leadership, right? In this, this is just what makes sense. This is the next right career move, right? If for lack of a better word. And yet experiencing this sense that has been there my whole life that I don't think I'm called to that position. That hit a lot of those insecurities too. Well, if I'm not called to that, if this is what some people are looking at me for, maybe isn't this what makes sense? If I'm not able to step into that, who am I, right? It really hit at a lot of those core identity things. Like, I mean, we were talking off camera a little earlier about how work identity really gets at a lot of us as men, right?
Yeah.
We put our identity in our careers, and I think there are some ways I had done that without being very aware that that was a potential. I had done that anyway. So it really brought up a lot of this. So fast forward that, the situation relationally and everything resolved, but internally, there wasn't a lot of resolution in my own soul. I ended up going through recognizing God needs to do something deep here, and I don't know what's gonna do that, right? Struggled to control all my life too, and there was nothing I could control about this moment. Like, I couldn't force myself to grow. I couldn't force myself past this. I'm just experienced a lot of depression through this.
Okay.
And that's a very powerless feeling, right? Like, waking up and just not feeling hope at all about the day, but feeling a lot of despair, day after day after day. When are things going to change? I can't control this. I don't feel like, that I'm the guy to step into what some people are looking at me for, things like that. So, through that process, really, God led me to a place of, graciously in the team of that leadership in church, we came to a place where it was safe to be able to say, I'm not that guy, right? I can't step into that role. And yet I was still left with, who am I? So long story short, God led me to go to this retreat that was a week-long retreat at a place called Healing Care Ministries out in Ohio. And it was a retreat that centered on formational prayer, which is really about, some people call it inner healing prayer. It's really about God walking alongside somebody like you and I are sitting here, like I would sit with someone who's a caregiver, they call it, who would just talk with me like a counselor would. But then also we would at times enter into just a time of prayer together. And it was all about the inner healing prayer. Formational prayer is about really posturing ourselves before the Lord to invite him into where he is in our day-to-day, our moment to moment. It's really asking the Holy Spirit to bring an experience of the Lord to us. And so the Lord really would use this time at a deeper level for me. So one of the things they talk about there at that retreat is really helped me clarify some things in my own journey, because they talked about this. It's called stages of healing, I believe. And they talk about, there's life circumstances that happen to us, and then because of those circumstances, we get triggered in some way, and there's some dysfunctional behavior, right, that happens, right? And that could be, in my life, that was anger that was expressed in unhealthy ways, right? Lashing out, rage, there was pornography, there was all these different things. There was this, in those moments, there was a lot of times in my life I would freeze too. Like I was conflict avoider. So all this conflict is going on in the church. What do? I freeze, right? I all of a sudden can't open my mouth when people are expecting answers from me, things like that. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these dysfunctional behaviors, and then below that, where do those come from? Those come from emotions that have been, emotional upheaval. That has really, that comes because I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling insecure, all of these different things. But then below that, like I could get that, I kind of went that far in my step work. Below that is there's lies under those emotions that we believe, right? I'm feeling insecure because I think my worth is found in what I do, right? Some of those performance-based identity lies, things like that. And so I started to discover those things, but then really what this retreat was focused on was getting one layer deeper than that, as those lies come from woundings in our life. And I'd always looked at my life as a pretty normal life that didn't experience a whole lot of pain. And I think because of that, I wasn't aware of how pain in my life was affecting me. Mm-hmm. And so some of the things that happened on the retreat were just some times of prayer that they really postured us to bring our pain to the Lord and really look back at our lives and say, okay, where is this coming from? Why have you felt this way? When did you feel like this before? And God really used these times of prayer to posture me in ways to to encounter Jesus in a way that I never had before. I'd always heard about people experiencing Jesus, but I didn't know what they meant, right? And so I had all these performance-based identity lies, right? That I couldn't do things right, that I couldn't do things well, and I knew they weren't true. You can put the word of God to them and say, well, God loves you anyway, and all of this stuff. You can quote scripture and everything, but those don't really get at the core because in my life I've had experiences that have really caused a whole lot of deep pain in my life.
Right.
And I can quote scripture at it, but that doesn't do much for the pain, you know?
Yeah.
And what we've really got to do in our journey with Jesus is in some way, and it doesn't have to look this way, but for me, inner healing prayer was one of the things God used to do this, was bring that pain to the Lord and say, God, where are you at in this? And so I had some encounters in prayer where I'm just really getting gut level, raw, honest with Jesus in prayer in the presence of another person. And in ways, letting out emotion and grief and voicing some things that I had kept really deep. And doing that, with the guidance of my caregiver was named Josiah, through Josiah's guidance, really, we were just able to put that before the Lord. And I was able to experience his presence, his goodness, his love in those moments of prayer. He just gave me permission, Josiah would give me permission to just listen for what the Lord might be saying in this moment. And like, even to saying that to you, like, I remember hearing that in my life, and I'm like, I've never really heard the Lord speak to me, right, in voices. And so he didn't, right? But yet I heard the Lord in those moments, some of those moments, challenge some of the lies that I believed from the beginning about myself. Like, to say that he loved and valued me, to say that he was glad I was there, right? Mm-hmm. Not because of what I did. He was just glad I was there. Yeah. For me to cry out to the Lord in prayer and say, God, why are you letting all this happen? This is devastating. Why are you letting this happen? And for him to, I'm not going to go into the whole details in the story, but for him to essentially say in that moment in a very clear way to me, I brought you through this for this moment right here so that you would know I was close to you, that I care about you, that I'm pursuing you in this moment. And that was really life-changing for me. So that was like 2.5 years ago. And so when they talked about healing all the way down to those levels, that was helpful for me because I think in the church a lot of times what I had experienced, and I think we all have a tendency to do this, we get to the behavior, right? I want to fix my behavior. We don't go to the deeper levels, right? Right. And so the 12 steps, like they kind of help me get to the emotional level and some of the lies. And then this prayer work that I did and still continue to do really helped me get below even to some deeper lies. So God peeling back more layers, and really get to some woundings in my life and some ways where there was even from childhood things that through my parents did the best they could, and my family did the best they could. So, but I just experienced things that I didn't. There were certain needs I had that I didn't get met in some ways in certain moments, and those stuck with me, right? Mm-hmm. And these little moments that are human moments, right? For my kids, it could be one of those moments where I was clapping my hands that could cause them a lot of pain that they need to process a little later in life. For me, it was other moments of pain to process and realize God was right there in those moments, and he wants me to bring that pain to him. So, yeah.
No, that's good. I'd like, are you continuing to add to the growth process?
Yeah,
There's some of us, and even when I first got into recovery, it's like, okay, you got to work the 12 steps. All right, so I'll work the 12 steps, and then I'm good. Like, I don't need to,
you don't need anything else, right?
My certificate, diploma, whatever, and I can go on with life. And it's just, and God just laughs at our plans.
Right.
So he's
right.
like, okay, you'll find out. And
Which
I did. And
there's more.
You rework them in other programs, just for myself. And so same way with, the week retreat and digging beyond sort of the cognitive behavioral therapy that, the world tries us to do. And that's that correction of behavior correction. And it goes deeper into, the root causes like we were just talking about. So that's good. And so, you said you're continuing to do so. Coming out of that week, is there somebody that you continue to have accountability with? Maybe some of the guys in leadership, or what does that look like as far as continuing to live in the victory that's happening for you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that looked like I was continuing to connect with my caregiver from the retreat, Josiah. I would meet with him. We'd have virtual meetings. So that's a little less regularly now, but that was really helpful for like the first year after that retreat to really kind of begin to kind of walk in these fresh ways of thinking and processing and praying, and staying in touch with people from the retreat, because you go away to these experiences, right? If you have the gift of doing that, if the Lord makes that opportunity available, you go away with these, and it's like, same thing with summer camp as a kid. You like go there, you pray the prayer, you go up front in the bonfire, and then you come home, and it's like completely disconnected from that experience, right? So it was really grounding for me to stay in touch with a lot of those people, and we're still in touch. To a couple of them specifically that we visit each other and stay in touch with, and just keep open about our journeys and where the Lord has us in that. And then I think God's just surrounded me with a healthy group. First of all, at church, as far as some of the leadership teams I'm in and everything, there's a lot of us who are going through similar journeys in different ways. So even though their experiences are looking a little different, God's revealing some kind of parallel truths and keeping us on track with each other. And there were ways where even when I worked at a church, I didn't always vocalize a lot of my journey. There were some things that it was just like, well, I don't know if that's going to make sense to people, right? We hold back because we think it's ours, and we don't know if anybody else is going to be able to relate.
We're terminally unique, right?
Yeah, yes, that's it. And God's continually proving me wrong in that, So I think there's ways where I've gotten more aware of what God's doing moment to moment and week to week in my life. It used to be if God did something in my life, it was like, okay, that must be for the next message I'm going to teach, or the next place I'm going to share with somebody else. That's for them. And God is slowing me down and saying, no, I want to talk to you. Like Ben, I love you. Like, this is for you. Heard a message where somebody was talking about, the book of Revelation, and John is, getting this whole vision, and then there's things that he says he doesn't write down. Like the angel, don't write that down. That's just for you. And you're like, wow, God spoke that was just for John, even in the context of this huge letter that's going to be given to the church, right? For thousands of years. God had something specific to say to him. Why would we think, right? Why would we think that God wouldn't want to say something specifically to us? Mm-hmm. And so I think God's grown me an awareness of this, again, this moment to moment. It's presence-based living is another phrase that, that I've been taught and really grown in, is just being aware of the constant presence of the Lord and attuned to what, listening for what he's saying, because I can go into any moment, any day with my plans, right? And my agenda and everything. And if I'm not careful any given day, I cannot check in with God at all, right? Get to the end of my day and I didn't pray once. Whereas Richard Foster says the whole Bible is God saying, I am with you, will you be with me, right? And I feel like God's pursuing us in every single day, saying, and there's that invitation, like, am I going to be with him right now in this moment? Like, and each moment thereafter in the day. So, some of those victories were helpful. And then even just reviewing, as I knew this was coming up, one of the things I was doing was just kind of getting refreshed on my own journey a little bit, and even looking at my journal back from 2.5 years ago, going through that tough time at church. And it was like day after day after day, like a lot of the journal entries sounded the same. There was a lot of that depression, a lot of that despair, a lot of those that darkness, waking up in the context of that. And looking back at that, again, God didn't flip a switch. So I can't point to one place it all of a sudden changed. I just know that I read that, and 2.5 later, my day-to-day is actually absolutely completely different. I wake up day to day, and it's not, the first thought is not a lustful temptation. Right. Or if it is, I'm getting on my knees, right? I'm running quick from that, on the days that, on the good days. But so it's, I feel like there's, I think we often recognize that we have a lot further to go, and we forget how far we've come. Mm-hmm. And so it's been really helpful for me. It's been life-giving for me to hear people, around me in work situations, at church, and other things saying, like, I see a difference in you. Like, I can see it in your eyes. I can see it in the way you're sharing. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was there. but that's affirming that God's doing something that I wasn't even aware of, right? And so, I think that's another thing. As I am encouraged by people speaking into me, it makes me aware to speak into other people's journeys, right? I think we hold back from speaking into each other's journeys. And, there's this almost this lie in the church that we're afraid of building each other up because we're afraid we're going to get cocky, right? And it's, it's not you, it's God, right? It's Jesus in you, right? I know it's not you, but no, like you're participating with Jesus. Good job. Like, well done. I see this in your life.
Yeah, exactly.
And as people have spoken into that into my life, I all of a sudden like get a hunger, like I want to do that for them too. And so God's making me aware of that as well. And it's just that's part of the benefit of being in community together. So, yeah.
Well, that's definitely what you did here today, and being willing to put your life story out there and talk about some difficult stuff, and end with a lot of the hope that has been coming over the years, and God willing will continue for you.
Yeah, willing.
So I appreciate your time and your willingness to sit here with me today and go through it. And so I know you shared a lot, and there was a lot there. Anything that I should have asked that I didn't, or that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I don't think so.
No? All right. That's good.
If I think of something, I'll call you and come dressed the same. And no, we'll record it then.
Fit it right in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. Appreciate it. I love what you're doing here, and just it's helpful to get all our stories out there to encourage each other in this. So look forward to seeing more stories on this podcast too. Yeah.
Amen.